Okay, it being 5:30 PM, I'll call to order special meeting of the Oregon School District Board of Education. We are at the Innovation Center at Oregon High School. I am Steve Zock. Brian Bustler is with me about 10 feet away, and Katie Heights is about 20 feet away. And the rest of our members of the board are participating remotely, as are the administrative team. Um, Ms. Heights, would you call the roll?
Ms. Feeney? Ms. Oderico?
I'm here.
Ms. Flanagan?
I'm here.
Mr. Pankratz?
Present.
Ms. Bijak?
Here.
Mr. LeBrun?
I'm here.
Mr. Zock?
Present. All right, the board has a quorum. I know Barb was trying to,
I can
She's-
see her on, I can see her face.
Barb is on, we've got her face, but she's got to unmute to say hello. So if you would text her and try to find out what's going on. I have proof that the meeting has been appropriately noticed under Wisconsin open meetings law. In specific, it has been noticed that the board would be appearing remotely to comply with Governor Evers' order, Safer at Home, Executive Order number 12. The meeting is being live streamed on OCA Media and via telephone. The number of that is 813-370-0457, 813-370-0457. The PIN number to listen is 177-992-727, followed by the hashtag. You can get that number also at the Board of Education site under agendas. There is a space at the Innovation Center for people to watch on closed screen. It's outside of this meeting room. It's physically present to have 10 people present, and there's enough space to social distance under the executive order. So I have proof that the meeting has been appropriately noticed under that. I will need a motion to approve the agenda as posted that contains one action item, policy 180, and a discussion item, staffing plan for 2021. Would I have a motion to that effect from one of the board members?
So moved.
Oh. I'll second. This is Courtney. I'll second.
Okay, and we have to do a roll call vote. One of the rules that we'll follow is that every motion will be recorded by a roll call. Would you call the roll, Katie?
Yes, Barbara's working on it, her microphone is not working.
I think I'm on.
Oh, there you are, Barb.
Hi, Barb.
Hi, Barb.
Hi.
Welcome.
All right.
Hey.
The motion, Barb, is to approve the agenda as posted.
Yep.
Okay, Tim,
Yes.
Ms. Oderico,
Yes.
Ms. Feeney,
Yes.
Ms. Flanagan,
Yes.
Mr. Pankratz,
Yes.
Ms. Bijak,
Yes.
Mr. Zock.
Yes, meeting has been, the motion is approved and we have an agenda. For the purposes of facilitating the conversation, we can see you guys in boxes, or most of you guys in boxes on the live screen at the Innovation Center. There's also a chat bar. If you want to speak, I think you can raise your hand, and Katie, I think, will be able to see and let us know that someone wants to speak, or you can put that on the chat box, or you can just butt in. I think what we should do is that when you begin to speak, just identify who you are so that we know. Sometimes it might be obvious, but sometimes it's not for our viewing audience. Okay? So the first item is policy 180. Before we move in, we did a check, and I want to make sure the record reflects that, and Katie put this in the minutes, that all the board members were able to hear Katie, Brian, and myself in the Innovation Center, and we were able to hear them as well. And I think Paul confirmed that that's also being broadcast, so everyone has access to the conversation. Gina, am I missing anything before we proceed further?
No, you have it.
Okay, good. One thing we need to do is policy 180. Policy 180 is the policy that 180.02 specifically that we adopted last year that permits us to remotely participate, and that was drafted with respect to having one board member participate and requires a quorum to be actually present at the Innovation Center in order to have any type of remote participation from a board meeting. So we need a motion to waive that. Gina, remotely participating is permissible under these circumstances, is it not?
Yes, it is.
Okay. Gina and I discussed before everybody came on a motion that we could make, and I'm gonna read it and then ask Gina if she approves if that's legally permissible. And then I would need someone to make the motion and then have a second. But the motion would be as follows: to waive the provisions of policy 180.02 and to permit full board remote participation in meetings during the pendency of Executive Order 12, Safer at Home, provided such meetings and notices comply with current DOJ guidelines as of the date of the meeting and state law. The board will ratify this action at its first meeting that has a full quorum physically in attendance. And we need that last sentence in there because our policy requires for this meeting to take place that we actually have to have a quorum present to change the policy. So we'll need a provision when we do get together with a quorum physically present that we ratify this action. So I would need a motion to that effect.
I make that motion.
Is there a
As
second?
stated. This is Anna.
Second, Barb Feeney.
All right, we have a motion and a second. Is there any discussion? And I'll wait for about 5 seconds, and if I hear nothing, because I'm not getting total visual clues, then we'll move on to vote.
Steve, this is Troy. Could you, just for my information, could you read the last sentence of that motion again?
Yes, the board will ratify this action at its first meeting that has a full quorum physically in attendance.
Okay, thank you.
Steve, it's Krista. One question. Would we have to have a board meeting of the old board in order to ratify that? So that would have to occur at a meeting of the current board before the future board takes hold?
Gina? Did you hear Krista's question?
I did. So I would say that as long as it is the board that currently holds office, that would be a valid ratification. So I don't know of a legal requirement right now for it to be the current board. But if that changes, we will certainly be in touch right away.
Are there any other questions? Will you call the roll?
Ms. Bijak,
Yes.
Ms. Feeney,
Yes.
Ms. Oderico,
Yes.
Ms. Flanagan,
Yes.
Mr. Pankratz,
Yes.
Mr. LeBrun,
Yes.
Mr. Zach.
Yes, motion carries, and given Executive Order 12, I suspect that this is going to be the way in which we are going to be conducting business for the next couple months. I note that I didn't mention that we have Heather Garrison and Kevin Maring on as well. They are the two individuals who are up for election for board seats that will be vacated by Barb and Courtney. And so welcome, and Heather and Kevin, you will officially, assuming certification, we've got to figure some of those election details out. And when that happens, but it's anticipated that you will join us as board members on the 27th. So welcome, and welcome to our conversation. We wanted to have this meeting for a couple of reasons. One, we wanted to test out how virtual board meetings would work and how this is working remotely. And so we're going to be asking for your feedback. Email that to me after this is over about things that we can do to improve this so that it becomes smoother. So we wanted to have a test run before we get into a regular board meeting next week. The second thing is we had talked about meeting especially for a period of time just for purposes of the board discussing amongst itself and being able to ask questions of the administration regarding the staffing plan that was presented to us on March 9th, which seemed a long time ago. A lot of things have happened since then. And so this is that opportunity, is to walk through that that plan and to ask any questions, and I'll ask people who have comments. I'm going to kick it off. I'm going to go through and talk, inquire of each of you individually if you have any questions or comments as we go through. I just think it's going to be easier that way because we don't have visual presence here to get the cues on that. So I'll walk through with you individually. But I wanted to start out with a question, Brian and Andy and A-Team, is that with the current economic situation, how is that going to impact at all the revenue that served as the basis for the staffing assumptions? And what might we expect down the road?
Well, first, this is Brian. First, I was hoping that all the board members saw the email that I sent today from John Forrester with the School Administrative Alliance. John is the executive director. He prepared a 1.5-page email just summarizing some concerns and potential challenges that public schools will face in the 2020/21 school year. Where we are today, we certainly can't say the information that we put together on March 9th is going to come true 100%. We know from John Forrester's information that likely the economic hit that Wisconsin and other states will take will result in less tax revenues, which will result in less money available for the legislature to allocate to municipalities and public schools. So there's not a short answer to what does our position look like in the future. I believe it will become clear as the Legislative Fiscal Bureau prepares an estimate. But so far, I haven't seen an estimate unless Andy has checked and seen an estimate. And what you have is information also based on enrollment. And to the extent clearly impact the housing market, that's going to be an impact on next year's budget as well. So I'll stop and see if Andy has anything he would like to highlight or correct or add.
No, I wouldn't correct anything. Brian, I think, covered it fairly well. The growth number we were anticipating was 150 students. I think we'll grow some because our numbers in January were up from our third count in September. But I think the 150 is probably overly optimistic at this point in time. So the other things, as Brian mentioned, from state revenue point of view, we're kind of early in that game. I have not seen anything from the Legislative Fiscal Bureau yet, so that will, I'm sure, come at some point in time.
Do any board members have any questions of Brian or Andy regarding the revenue end of the consideration?
This,
Steve,
Okay.
oh.
Go ahead.
Go ahead, Anna. You go ahead. I'll go after you.
I was just gonna say, I did get a chance to read the email that you forwarded out that has kind of 3 scenarios for what we might expect. I guess, do you have, should we as a board play out those different scenarios from the standpoint of if this is what's going to happen, maybe then we're dealing with less potential additional funding for the 2020-2021 school year? I guess maybe you'll get to that, but what numbers should we be thinking through or looking at when we're having these conversations about additional staffing resources relative to that particular potential of having not seeing that per pupil increase that was originally anticipated?
Okay. Courtney?
Oh, my question was just a quick one, just asking Andy for a quick reminder, what do we have in fund balance right now?
Off the top of my head, I think we're in the $12 million range. So there's a significant amount of money that we have that currently covers for cash flow purposes.
Okay, and what percentage of our overall budget is that? Do you know, you're the math guy off the top of your head.
It's in the low 20% range.
Okay, thank you.
And Andy, one of the concerns that we had, even given that number, the percentage, is that that's coming close to the limit of us cash flowing operational expenses during the year.
Yeah, that's correct. We really haven't grown the fund balance for several years, which we didn't need to. We were doing fine, but as the budget's grown with growth, we're starting to have times of the year, specifically in the winter, where things are getting a little tight.
Anna, in terms of your question, it's impossible to provide an exact estimate in terms of where things are going to land. Is it feasible to come up with 2 or 3 different scenarios as this develops over the next several months? Absolutely. The information that we received from John Forrester was just posted, so that's relatively new. And while I have great confidence in John Forrester, I have more confidence in the Legislative Fiscal Bureau's ability to make economic projections, because they have economists on staff. And I think that's the best information we'll have in the future. As my advice to the board is, we need to be mindful that the economic climate has changed, and we need to be mindful that likely we may need to make some changes or access fund balance next year based on where all of the revenues estimates come in and the information that we learned from the Department of Public Instruction. Of course, one of the unfortunate parts with that is we really don't get all of the information from the Wisconsin Department of Public Instruction or the Department of Revenue until October, which means we are several months into the budget year already. So tonight is one where there are likely less answers regarding the future in terms of financing, but we can certainly provide more answers for the report that Gina led the administrative team to prepare for your consideration. And Andy, you're welcome to add anything to those comments.
I think you covered it well.
Any other questions about the revenue side?
Steve, this is Troy. I guess just to recap a couple of things that I'm seeing here. Our revenue cap estimated increase as it stands would be 925,000 based on the 175 per pupil. The scenario that was in the memo today from SAA basically had three scenarios, but that middle scenario would be 0 added to your revenue limit. If we were to consider that situation, we would be at a deficit of about 500,000. Am I interpreting all of this correctly?
Yeah, in general, that you'd be right in that ballpark. I would say that not in addition to the 925,000, if the $175 per student plus the 1789 is in question, the other component to this is the growth that I was mentioning before, and that's the line right above that, which is another 565,000. We'll see some of that, but I don't know that we'll see all of it.
So, Brian, were you saying, Barb Feeney here, that at the meeting we will have next week, you might be bringing us a revised staffing plan based on some revised expectations? Or are we going to still be working with the one that we got in March?
I believe the unfortunate reality is the estimates that we have in March are still the best estimates until we get direction from the Department of Public Instruction or from the Legislative Fiscal Bureau. I also realize as I say that, that's not the answer that everyone would like to hear.
Well, we already are suspecting that we're going to have lower growth than the revenue projections forecast. That's going to mean a shortfall in the analysis, right?
I believe so.
I mean, then it becomes the question of the board is, are we gonna fund any gap in revenue with fund balance based upon the staffing plan that we have in front of us? Or are we going to go back and ask for revision to the staffing plan with a couple different scenarios of revenue forecast? What do people think? Let's just walk through that. Tim, what's your thought on where we sit financially and how you want to proceed in terms of looking at the staffing plan?
Yeah, it would seem to me that at a bare minimum, we should have a list of items that are on the bubble that we can set aside to say, if we get a significant reduction in revenue, once we hear from the budget, whoever we need to hear from, once we get those words, we need to have a list of things that, hey, here are the things that were on the bubble, and we need to prioritize those and start ticking through them as we get a better understanding of the dollars, the shortfall dollars. That would be my perspective, at least. So I think we need some alternatives. We can certainly work with the staffing plan that we have from March, but I think we need to summarize down some of the bubble items, especially those that are relating specifically to enrollment. You know, for instance, we've got, it mentioned that we're going to have X number of students at FES or X number of students at the middle school. If we have a change in dollars, what are the things that we're going to need to pick from and prioritize before we start spending money on those things?
Troy?
I guess what's on my mind is that I'm looking at the table of the staffing for the new school for FES, and on the lower portion of the table, I see a lot of TBD items under some of the paraprofessionals, food service, etc. So I guess I'm just wondering, is there some room there where we can maybe able to scale back on some of that staffing at the new school, or reallocate? Because I believe some of that staff was intended to be reallocated from elsewhere. But I guess that part is just unclear to me when we have a projection of operating costs for the new school with so many TBD values.
Any administrator want to speak to that?
This is Gina. I can speak to that if you'd like.
Go ahead.
So in terms of the reason we have the TBD, and Troy, it's an excellent observation by you, is that we have a staffing model that we use for our buildings K-6, that the FTE is based on the student enrollment and the number of sections and the needs of the student. And so once we have a better idea, particularly 5th and 6th grade, about who is going to be at RCI and who's going to be at Forest Edge, as well as the number of sections that we have, then we'll be able to better determine the FTE allocation. So for example, if there's 2 kindergarten sections, then we would not need a full regular education para, which would be different like if there's 4. So almost all of the TBD really depend on knowing how many students will be at Forest Edge and what would be in their IEP or their 504 plans. And so right now we've been very cautious about filling positions at Forest Edge. And the positions we have filled have been almost all reallocations, except for example, an art teacher moved from one elementary to Forest Edge. We know we need that art teacher at the elementary that she left. So, but otherwise, in terms of classroom teachers, those have all been reallocated positions. So we have been very conservative in what we've posted and what we plan to post until we know what our numbers look like.
So really, I guess what I'm hearing is that these are mainly not new positions, they're reallocations from other schools based on student need.
Yes, in terms of the TBD, I mean, some will be additional positions if we have more kids, because, you know, Forest Edge was meant to help the overcrowding too at RCI. So if we have movements from those students, then those will be reallocations. But if we do see the growth, then we will have new positions, but then the funding for those will come with the growth.
Right, got it. Thank you, Gina.
Krista?
I guess I see it in terms of a process where I think we have to have a discussion as a board based on the staffing plan in front of us and get more information and ask our questions based on our review of that. And then I think we have to do a couple contingencies, one being the 2 variables that Andy talked about, the student revenue cap 3-year average, and then the revenue cap estimated increase from the state. And if those don't come to fruition. So I guess I would like to see us have a discussion based on the staffing plan before us, so we can understand relationships and what the positions are and potential dominoes, and then have a discussion based on if we have this, okay, or if we don't have this, what does it look like? So we can start preparing ourselves for what those scenarios mean. I guess those are my thoughts.
Yeah, my intent was to loop back to the current staffing plan once we got some of the revenue discussion done and the potential implications, so that we can kind of figure out what the landscape looks like before we dive into the weeds of what the staffing plan looks like. Courtney, any thoughts?
Yeah, I guess the thoughts that I have are relative to the memo that Brian referenced earlier that came from the, was it the SAA, regarding potential revenue not necessarily bonuses, not the right word, but one of the things that I read into the menu was there are potentially underutilized funds from this quarter that could help next year. I'm wondering if, we've thought about that in terms of things that we're not spending this year in school budgets under the 1920 budget, like school trips or substitute teachers we're not paying, that kind of thing. The other question I had was relative to summer school. I mean, I know we don't know what's going to happen with the remainder of this school year, but should we be going into June and not have school? We need to be thinking a little bit about summer school, whether that's going to get staffed, whether there'll be money left from that. I know everyone's saying the same thing. There's a lot of things we don't know, but I don't want us to forget that there might be some monies to get from things that we don't yet know about.
Andy, what is the revenue that is in the budget for summer school? Net, net revenue over expenses.
Net revenue over expenses. Actually, summer school, we kind of subsidize a little bit, about $50,000. I spent a good part of my day writing a couple page document regarding summer school. It has all kinds of implications because summer school uses an FTE based on the number of minutes of instruction, but it's a 3-year average. So the first year, there is a positive impact by not having summer school. The second and third years, there is a negative impact. So I'd be happy to, a little bit more detailed than that, but that's the gist of it that we could talk about. So for 2021, there would be a positive impact of not having summer school, but then 2021, 22, 23, there's a negative impact. That if we were to try to establish summer school in those years, put it back into place, we'd have a little bit of a struggle.
And then you think that that's about a real rough $50,000 pot?
Well, that's the revenue, that's the cost that we subsidize summer school with. The first year, the impact is over $300,000 that would be freed up. And as Courtney said, there are other accounts that will probably go unspent. Our utility budgets will go unspent. We'll have some funds and transportation that will go unspent. There is some money here and there within the budget that would go unspent if we don't go back into session. And Courtney was also correct that the state government, wasn't that long ago, a couple weeks ago, that they were trying to actually spend some money because their revenue estimates were good. Obviously, that has changed over the last couple weeks, but they started in a decent position. So it will be interesting to see how this all plays out over the next couple months.
Andy, any funds that are not utilized this year become general fund balance funds, correct?
Mostly, yes.
Okay, so if we would spend those to fund a staffing plan for this school year, that creates an issue in terms of where that gets funded in the next cycle.
Yeah, essentially you'd be spending fund balance next year because it would be credited into fund balance as of June 30th. So it's not a bad thing. It'd be fine. But then down the road, you do need to strategically think about how you're going to find ongoing revenue sources to pay for those expenditures. Hopefully growth will take off again and we'll catch back up.
Barb, before we delve into the positions and the staffing recommendation, anything about the general topic of the current economic condition relative to that from your end?
Well, maybe this is what other people have said a little differently, but it seems like we should be starting with a lower growth projection because it seems like this is inevitable, not just because building may be depressed, but families might be making decisions to stay where they are for the time being if they had been considering moving. So it seems like that would be prudent. As far as summer school goes, I guess a question would be how soon a decision would need to be made to go or not go. And I don't need an answer to that. Secondly, are there options for summer school classes that could happen if we're in some sort of middle ground when it comes to social distancing at that point? Like maybe we don't want kids all in a classroom, but maybe some sort of activity-based classes would be feasible. Don't know the answer to that either, but certainly parents will be looking for some help, relief when we get out of this. And then finally, I don't know if this is part of the next part of the discussion, but I assume that some of you have had some conversation about what happens if school doesn't reopen in the fall. And that's another big unknown. But I guess just thinking about what that means for staffing decisions, if there's, in 2 months from now, if there's still uncertainty about that.
Anna?
Thanks, Steve. I guess I don't know if I have any additional comments, but I would agree that it would be helpful to have another version option put forth for what revenue expectations there may be based on potentially lower growth and potentially less of the per pupil increase. And I know we don't know the numbers, but and we can do the math. We can all figure out those things. And I guess really what it comes down to is, doing our best to understand what are the must-haves and the legal requirements going into next year compared to what are the wishful lists. And of course, the staffing plan sort of breaks it down to that into those categories. But I think maybe it's just even a harder look at that, depending on if right now one of the options might be that we're looking at a deficit just to fulfill the legal requirements that we are showing in here. So that's the only comment I have.
I think I got everybody on that initial pass through. Anybody have anything else to say on that issue before we delve into questions about the staffing plan?
Just one last thing. I just want to make sure that whatever we come forward with for next week's meeting also includes what is our best guess on unspent money through the end of this school year. Just very high level, unspent money, whether that be transportation money, whether that be summer school money, potential summer school money, any trips that were planned. Is there a pool of money that, because of the stay-at-home that's in place today, isn't being spent? Is there a budget balance of dollars that is accumulating? And what's our best guess as to what that'll be by the end of the school year?
Thank you. I have a couple thoughts on that initial topic. The first is, I'll need some input, and I don't need it tonight, about when do we have to decide and what do we have to decide when, okay? And is there some stuff we can defer? Do we start seeing a better shape of how long our safer at home order is going to hold and what that portends in terms of schooling for this year and next year? The second thing that's going to be in my background as I walk through this is that not only do we have, as a district, some significant economic questions relative to revenue, but our tax-paying public is got the same things, and there are a lot of folks who are going to be negatively impacted in a significant way because of this. And I think it behooves us as a board to approach our spending with that as a backdrop. The third thing that I kind of want an idea on is kind of a worst case, really bad picture, kind of a medium picture, and kind of what we thought was going to happen in terms of revenue. I know it's shooting darts, but we gotta put the dartboard on the wall to get a sense at this analysis. Then we've got a number of different expenditures that were outlined in the staffing plan. The first of those seem to be fixed cost expenditures. The educator comp plan, the plan increase, staff salary increases, WRS and FICA, et cetera. But I would like to know whether any of the dollars that were set forth for those expenditures, which totaled just north of $3 million, whether there's any flexibility in those, okay? Because once we had totaled those up in the staffing plan and we utilized the revenue that had been estimated, that allowed us in around $400,000 of additional revenue to look at option 1 information and option 2 information. So I'd like to look at least for those expenditure items before option 1, what flexibility is there in any of those? Okay, are those going to be fixed costs that if we run short on revenue, that we will have to utilize our fund balance to meet those minimum obligations for going forward? Okay. So that's kind of where I'm at. Did that generate any
Steve?
questions from administration or board members?
Steve, it's Krista. I agree with you. I wanted to see the table 1 above option 1, what you just said. Which of those are really, we do have some flexibility and which ones we don't? I think that's a worthy discussion.
Yep. I think we all understand what each of those are as opposed to having a conversation about the options, but I think we need to look at, do we have wiggle room? Yes or no? And if we have it, what is it? Okay. Anybody else? All right. So this will be an opportunity. Brian, anything that you want to add from that conversation?
Yes, as we think about next Monday night, it is going to be really to pull together a realistic projection. We can provide a projection for Monday night. And what I'd like to, a seed I'd like to plant in people's mind is the word a bridge. How are we going to build a bridge in terms of where we are today and come up with the best estimate possible for next year, and likely the best estimate for the 2021-22 school year, because this is going to take us some time. If the board would prefer, we could look at delaying next Monday's meeting and giving us an extra week to come up with a better estimate, or we can continue with next Monday's meeting and perhaps have a better estimate in terms of finances at the end of the month. I just know there are some limits in terms of the projections that we can provide. I think what John provided was, what John Forrester provided was a best case, worst case, and didn't even know, I'm not going to with the reduction. And we want to provide you with valuable information that you can make a decision. It's okay if you tell us, with all the uncertainty that we have now, and this is really the policy question, we'll make a better decision by taking more time.
And that got to my question of when do we have to decide, and if we have to decide stuff sooner rather than later, what do those bridge decisions look like? Okay. The second thing is, for me, it's as important for me to know in making expenditure decisions what we don't know and when we might know it.
For me, this is Anna. For selfish reasons, I would support delaying it a week because I'm not available on April 13th. I have a work meeting. So if that, if that adds to it.
Brian and I will work through that based upon the rest of the conversation this evening and make a decision on how best to proceed with input from you guys, okay?
Okay.
I can see that Andy is still sitting vertically in the chair. So and I can see he's breathing, he's giving me a thumbs up. So I now have more confidence in terms of our ability to move forward.
You pulled the Ouija board out. Right? Okay. Let's walk through the option once, and this is an opportunity for board members to ask questions about those to get a better understanding of them. So let me walk through, folks. Krista, you had indicated that you had some questions about that. You wanted to talk about those, so I'll pick on you first.
Swell.
Yeah.
So I guess just generally above option one, and we don't have to get into it right now, but I do have some questions about the flexibility we have in the educator compensation plan increase, the 325, if we have seen a plan for that yet or not. So that's something that I would be interested in seeing what that is. In terms of option one, and then if we move into, I guess more of my questions are option two, which is we had a presentation on the neighborhood concept and the neighborhood model. And so we had talked about in the last meeting, how is that going to be carried through with OMS? Because we do have the table 2 seems to be mostly focused on OMS and OHS. And so I would like to see, I guess, how that model would fit with OMS. And does that still then have us look at counselors and associate principals and admin interns? And would that change anything if we had a neighborhood model at OMS? And then my other question was in table 4, we had a school psychologist for OHS. And so I guess I'm trying to understand the neighborhood model better from a associate principal, counselor, or school psychologist. And so I guess I need to understand the neighborhood model, relationship, mental health, what we're doing there. And if it's a counselor or a school psychologist, what would be the, if those things are, I guess why a counselor was in table 1, but the school psychologist was further in table 4. So I guess I'm just not really understanding the neighborhood model.
Is that a Leslie or Jim question, Brian?
That would be a Jim question on the high school.
Can you hear me?
Reiner,
Can you hear me
hi.
okay?
We can see
Good.
you.
Mhm.
Hi, Jim.
Awesome. So, Krista, in particular, the school psych is not necessary, is of course a key piece of the neighborhood model, but that ask in table 4 is really more rooted in a couple of things. We have about close to 70 504 plans that are developed and maintained at the high school, which is quite an undertaking. Additionally, our school psych is responsible for exit testing of every student who has an IEP and leaves us. There are cognitives that are done. That is a big piece of that job, as well as any evals that occur, and re-evals as a part of that special education planning is huge. Plus, they're really important members of our mental health team as well. So that being in table 4 wasn't an add necessarily as a part of the neighborhood model per se, but really based on the types of particular job responsibilities that a school psych in a large comprehensive high school really undertakes. And so can I ask Krista, do you have a more specific question? How can I talk about the neighborhood model in particular for you?
I guess what I'm asking is, how would you explain the neighborhood model in terms of what are you trying to accomplish by moving? What is it going to do for the high school students to move to this model? And and then my next question is, based on that, is that something we should be looking at OMS as well? Or is it because it's a high school model that it would work? So what are we accomplishing with the neighborhood model?
We want every single student, and we want to be able to say that every single student has an ILP and has a post-secondary plan. So with the neighborhood model, we're looking to do vertical teams of support with an administrator, a counselor, and an admin assistant that would be full service support for families as they progress through OHS. We're looking that in particular to provide more extensive freshman transition support. Ninth grade transition is incredibly important. We're looking at establishing sophomore check-ins. So we would have conferences with each and every sophomore. Junior post-secondary planning would continue with counselors, and then a senior exit where they would share those post-secondary plans and reflection on their most significant learning. We feel that that is implementing the path forward and the board vision in 41102 of the Oregon School District policies. And just as a way to give full service wraparound support for each and every student and their family as they progress through Oregon High School and beyond.
Okay,
Let
so
me follow up on that, Krista, because I understand your question too, and it's one of the questions I had was that I like that model and wanted to discuss it more as we move forward. But the board paper contemplates reaching back into middle school too, and whether or not we're contemplating that as the model at the middle school, particularly if we have a request for another administrator there. Chris, is that kind of where you were reaching to?
yeah, I mean, I guess, you know, we're looking at the biggest part of funding is really for OMS and OHS. And so I guess I'm wondering if it's two different models or we're adopting a neighborhood model and shouldn't we be looking 7-12? And so I guess I'm trying to understand staffing and administrative intern. And I believe in all these positions and I believe in the model. I'm just saying, why are we just looking at the high school?
I think if I can jump in just quickly, and then Shannon might want to carry the ball from there, is that the middle school has neighborhoods already established in many ways.
Okay.
They do have their team concept, which is something that is a little insular, supportive family that gives teachers kind of a connection to students. And I think that Shannon may want to pick it up from there, but we don't currently have anything that resembles that.
Are those the connection groups?
So the middle school is divided up. Each grade has 2 teams, and those teams meet weekly. We do have student services members that are assigned to those teams, and I go to 2 team meetings and Jason goes to 2 team meetings. Kids take all their classes within those academic teams. So we really, or as kind of Jim said, we already have, I would call, we call them teams, not neighborhoods, but they serve, I think, a very similar purpose to create that small sense of community. Now within that, by team, they have connections, which are kind of like a homeroom. It meets every day. We try to cap it at 16 students, so it's really small, and those are also divided up by teams. So we might have 8 or 9 teachers that are on 7-0, and their connections are within that. And then we do all of our like social emotional learning, student-led conferences, all of that is run through those connections within the teams. So I would say we already have a structure. If you look at the best practices of research at the middle level, that's really the team model. And I know a lot of high schools have moved to that neighborhood model that Jim's talking about that really helps with the post-secondary planning, which is such a huge focus. So I feel like we have a structure, but it's more developmentally appropriate for our level and our age.
Thanks, Shannon. That makes sense. That was really kind of the heart of my question of just understanding.
Yeah.
those things?
No, it was a great question.
What we're unlocked in
That's
on
really
that
it for
is
me, Steve.
we're going to do planning in terms of implementing the position paper, the path forward, that we have the proper infrastructure in place to handle whatever plan we develop. And what I'm hearing is that the direction we're going generally right now, the middle school has that infrastructure that can be developed into a model. Chen, I'm seeing a yes on that. And what Jim is trying to do is to develop his infrastructure so that we can eventually blend that in one arc, whatever that becomes.
Yeah, and that was really my question, because we talk a lot about transitions. And so if what I'm hearing is that we've got that set up, and one of our most difficult transition is as freshmen. And so we're trying to build that transition process with a new model at the high school. That makes sense to me.
Great. Leslie, do you have anything to chime in on that particular topic? Because I know you've been involved in discussing that.
Yes, I've been involved, and I think that the way it was explained through Shannon and Jim is really pretty. It's well developed. The infrastructure is in the middle school to be able to do what we want to do for our students, and then having that at the high school, but changed slightly. For instance, at the middle school, on your team, you put classes that are in physical proximity to one another. At the high school, there is a team of people who are working with you and looking out for you, but you don't have that proximity. So there's just sort of this gradual release to the student with a supportive structure around it. It just makes sense.
Krista, any follow-up?
Then my only other question, Steve, sorry, the only other question I have is maybe for Andy and Gina. Do we see, given COVID, any changes in health insurance or other insurances that would have a negative or positive impact on this budget?
We already have sent our contract for next year in place for next year, so I think we are good with that. No one has given us any indication that those rates would not hold.
Okay, thanks.
Good. Well done, Krista. Yeah,
Yes.
Great, thanks. Thank you. Barb,
I guess the things I've had questions about, I talked about earlier, but I do feel like this question of if school does not reopen, or if school reopens and then there's a step back, are we, and I'm not asking for an answer, are we thinking about that and talking about what that looks like and how that might affect staffing plans? I don't know. And I don't know when we'll even know that for sure.
Barb, the obvious answer to your first question is yes, we've talked about it.
Yep.
And we pondered everything from, I think it's fair that most of us think we're not coming back to school this year.
Right.
Now that could change. And by this year, I mean the 1920 school year.
Right.
And,
2020.
Nope, the 1920.
Oh, 2019,
Yeah.
2020.
Yeah,
Yeah.
the school year we're currently in, which we've had that conversation for a couple of weeks, which led us to what are we going to do with summer school? Again, I'm not going to repeat that whole conversation, but we know we have to pick a go, no-go date with summer school. And the other factor that comes into that is, would parents allow their children to go to summer school?
Mm-hmm.
Or
Yep.
conversely, would summer school look more like the end of this school year in terms of distance learning? A concern that we have for next year is if we open and then we have to recycle into another social distancing situation. Of course, that we're going to get better information as the weeks and months go by, but that's a challenge that we thought about as well. And what it's created is an opportunity for us to become much better with distance learning. And to
Yes.
much better, it's something that a number of us have talked about for years, the ideal delivery model. And I go back and think about a conversation John, Leslie, and I had with Dr. Tempty and the physician from the CDC back on February 20th. And she kept asking us questions about distance learning and our ability to be able to respond to distance learning. And over the last couple of weeks, I realized she knew something that we didn't know at that point. And she was trying to push us in a particular direction and stretch our thinking and see what our response was. I have a feeling this distance learning model and delivery model, we're going to be utilizing it. Public schools will be utilizing it for a period of time.
Right, so then I
Anything
guess,
else?
yeah, not really.
Troy,
All right, so talking about tier 1, table 2, I mean, this is always difficult for us, obviously, because we always want it, we want it all. We want to staff everything. But I guess it's just a comment from me. What stands out to me on table 2, tier 1, are the 3 positions: the admin intern at OMS, the counselor at OHS, and the associate principal at OHS. Just following up on Jim's statement and Krista's questions about the neighborhood model and how that fits in with the path forward. To me, those 3 positions really resonate with moving our district down the road of the path forward. And I guess, in my opinion, those kind of would hold those 3 positions to a little higher level within that table. Not that the other positions aren't important, but those 3 do stand out. And in addition to that, I think, following up on Brian's statement about distance learning and the thought that this distance learning is probably here maybe longer than we think, and it may be coming back even in the fall. And so, to me, strengthening our administrative team and our counseling team really lends itself well to supporting that distance learning and all of the things that this administration team is doing in the background to facilitate that. So I guess, for me, believing in that neighborhood model and knowing that we want to get there someday in this climate, I would tend to want to do that earlier than later. So those are my thoughts.
okay, any specific questions? Are you good?
No, I think I'm good.
Okay. Anna?
Hi.
Hello.
Hi. So I do have one question regarding staffing for next year and or beyond that's not listed in this document. And I think Gina mentioned looking into this, and that's related to the change in our length of day and start time and the additional staffing resources for additional people to help offset the extended lunchtime to not impact the prep time for the K-4 teachers that would be potentially impacted by the length of day. So I would be curious to have those numbers. provided so that we have an understanding of what that looks like, or making sure that those resources are being accounted for in on our budgeting. So that was one of my questions.
Gina?
Yes, and I will be prepared to have those for you. I was praying for Friday for the posting for the meeting. My department was working on that, and then as you can imagine, many other HR issues took priority in light of the COVID-19 situation. One, and just, as always, it'll be an estimate until we know how many sections we have. So I'm just going with the paras that we have now.
Sure.
But I'll have rough numbers for you by Friday.
Okay. The only other question I had, and I think this was something that Krista had brought up, and whether or not we have an answer to it, but the same assumptions regarding class size as far as the number of teachers that we would be planning for, and just whether or not we've done another kind of review or evaluation of that classroom size relative to making those decisions on the number of teachers based on that number of students.
I can talk about that a little bit. And of course, related to the number of sections that will be at Forest Edge, that is something that we're continually looking at, because we're talking about reallocation of existing sections as opposed to hiring new teachers. And I think that really does apply for the positions that we put in table 2, tier 1. I don't remember exactly which one it was.
Yeah.
Or the middle school too.
Yeah.
The middle school's positions aren't based on new enrollment estimates. They're based on kids who are already here.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Those are my only questions.
Okay, good. Tim?
So one line item in that same table that hasn't been discussed is the reallocation, and there aren't dollars posted specifically. I'm just going to flip back to it for a moment. The reallocation of the deputy dollars into an assistant director of instruction. I know that that's certainly something that we're working towards, and I'm just wondering if that still belongs, with all the uncertainty. Is that more discretionary, or is that something that still belongs in that table at this point? So that's a question.
I think Brian or Leslie can talk to that.
Hey, Steve, this is Courtney. Before you go into an answer to that, I had a thought about that relative to what Troy was saying. And my thought about that particular position is that maybe it needs to be reimagined in this new environment of distance learning, and the job description could be thought of potentially as director of distance learning, or some sort of at least part of the job description to potentially plan for future events like this. So I wouldn't rule it out completely, but potentially reimagine the position. That was just a thought I had relative to that.
Leslie, do you want to weigh in?
Certainly. So I know that board members read what we put in the weekly, I think it was 2 Fridays ago, related to the research John and I did about school districts that are either our size or slightly larger, and how they operate their curriculum and instruction department that we call learning and student achievement. And I think I'm speaking for John, and I'm certainly encouraging him to say what he feels when I'm finished too. But our discussion was, it was very difficult for us to imagine this last year, and in particular, this the distance learning situation, if we had still been trying to operate the department with one person. So you can see that even at 2 people, we are not similar. We are understaffed compared to our peer districts. So, you know, we could do it, and we've been doing it, and we feel really good about the work that's happening. Can it be considered optional? Of course, because whatever what's right in front of the kids is the most important thing. But there, as we know, just in this most recent situation, there's an awful lot of behind the scenes work to make all that happen. And it's very difficult to imagine the last 3 weeks if I did not have John as a coworker in our department. So I don't know, John, if you want to speak any more to that. But of course, it's always optional because whatever is right in front of the kids should be prioritized.
John, want to jump in?
Yeah, I mean, I agree with that. Obviously, we need to look at it carefully. Courtney, that's a fascinating idea. I hadn't really thought of it being that dedicated to distance learning, but you know, clearly it's been on my mind a lot since that February 20th meeting with John Tempte and the doctor from the CDC. Interestingly, we've been shifting that way quite a bit in the past few years. But I know Jen Schmidt has been working a lot with the high school to prepare them and kind of move them to a blended model as well. And so they've been, I think, a lot more ready than they would have been had we not been shifting that way gradually. But this has definitely been a big shift in the past few weeks. With that said, I would echo what Leslie said. Now, obviously, moving into this position, you know, for the first time this year, I realized that I thought I knew what Leslie did because we've worked closely together for the past, you know, 5, 6 years. But I probably knew about 30%. And there's a whole lot of behind the scenes things like, you know, title grant administration and setting up things with the professional development evaluation program and educator effectiveness and things like that that aren't necessarily seen. So, you know, if we were to look at this, I think we would probably be wise to do something similar to the way that we structured the staffing plan, which is to look at the things that are required. You know, so we have educator effectiveness, you know, that's not something that we have an option to do or not. We have the title grant, which we don't really have an option to do if we're going to receive title money. We have a lot of the state mandated testing, some of which has increased in the past few years. And we have so things like that that are the required mandated items that have to be done by a CNI department. And then we have other things that are not you know, legally required, but are things that we put a priority on based on the Path Forward paper, the board vision, the board mission, and some of the initiatives that we've had around our core 5 values. And then we have the things that are, you know, probably that third tier. You know, I think in the staffing plan, we called them sort of the, you know, we've referred to them tonight as the on the bubble or the nice to haves. I'm not going to, you know, go into details about where I think those would be, but I think that might be something to consider if we're looking at not adding another position. We'd probably want to take a look at what are the legally required, what are the things sort of required due to class size, and then what are the things required due to initiatives from the board. So obviously anything's possible. I need to be really thoughtful about this. So, you know, if there's more information that we can provide beyond what Leslie prepared for the board, we'd be happy to take a look at that and, you know, give you whatever information you all can need to make a really good decision.
Thank you, John. Tim, anything more or a follow-up on that?
No, I don't think so. I think everybody covered, you know, the importance of building that neighborhood model and how those other line items really feed into that neighborhood model, working its way down towards OMS. That was the only item that really caught my attention and it wasn't a question of if. And so I don't want for anybody to think for a moment I was saying, you know, are we going to do this? Do we want to do this? It was simply more of maybe not if, but when. And when Courtney spoke up and said that reimagined, you know, taking those dollars and reimagining them a little bit differently, I really like that. More than anything, it was just to shine a light on, hey, these dollars and this role, is it the right role for these dollars? So I wasn't picking on anybody. I just thought it deserved some discussion around how they were being spent. That's all. Not if.
Thanks, Tim. Courtney?
Well, I didn't have any questions. That was really the big point I wanted to make. And I guess to segue onto that same thought is that looking forward, which is kind of where I always approach these things, do we need to be thinking in the future, and I'm sure Leslie and John and Brian, you all are, about potentially freeing up funds for training of staff and or obtaining technology or things that are going to ease this potential new delivery model moving forward. So I would hate to see us just like pretend this is a one and done, because what I'm hearing everyone say is nobody really thinks this is a one and done. So there needs to be some contingency thought about that as well. That's kind of my only other thought. So that's all.
Great, thank you. I think I got everybody. Did I miss anyone? I didn't think when we walked through, I did. A couple comments.
I just have.
Yeah, go ahead, Tim.
I'm sorry. I just kind of off the agenda a little bit. We're obviously having to think of things very differently than we had a month ago. And I'm wondering if there's going to be an opportunity as we talk about summer school, as we talk about, will we be going back to school for the rest of this school year? And do you think, especially considering with all that we've experienced just in the last 3 weeks, do you think there's an opportunity to have a new discussion on when school actually starts for next year? If it starts, I know that's always an if, but we've been so hemmed in. Our school year has been so hemmed in for so long about starting after Labor Day or starting in September. Do you think there is going to be an opportunity statewide to revisit that so that we can consider what could happen instead of having summer school and this school year that starts in September, how somehow we can merge those two things together, both budgetarily and also to spread the year out a little bit. So, schedules aren't so jam-packed for kids. School isn't starting so early. School isn't ending so late. All of those things that have really floated to the top just in the last couple of months.
Let me jump on that, because that was a point that as I was listening to you guys bring up your points, it struck me the thoughts that I was having over the last 3 weeks about what this virus has done to us. Courtney and John Tanner and Leslie, Brian, remember we've talked a lot about disruption theory in our path forward, and specifically about how hard it is to take an existing bureaucracy and move it into a new model. And I was intending to go back and look at when we started online learning. We drafted a couple-page document on online learning, which was intended to mean that we weren't trying to replace teachers and replace that with a different model of education. It was to move into a different paradigm of how our current teachers teach, and that was the bottom line, and how hard that is to move into absent some sort of disruption. And within a matter of weeks, a little virus has changed the world, but it has caused us to move so fast into the lane of a new paradigm of teaching that we've been talking about for 10 years that my head's spinning with it. And I know your guys is too, but we're along the path a lot farther. And so when Troy talked about this online learning and the neighborhood plan and the administrative positions being needed, because that's how we develop and facilitate the speed of changing to a new model. That rang really true to me with that. So any comments, Sean or Leslie, about that?
Well, I'll jump in and say, yeah, I remember those conversations and the whole, the innovator's dilemma and disruption theory. I think those were pretty formative, and it's been interesting to see us move gradually. And yeah, this really tipped the scales for it. The one thing I'll say is that the kind of work that we've been doing over the last, I'd say like 10 years, to try to provide for individualized learning plans, to try to personalize for every student, has led us to the point where we have a professional development plan that emphasizes things like highly effective practices, which are the way that we are personalizing for every child. And we also have been focusing on professional learning for teachers to do that. And that's, I think, what has driven a lot of our success in being able to continue to provide a high quality education for students, even when our, in the past like 10, 15 years, our rate of free and reduced lunch students and families has increased quite a bit. We've gotten a lot more diversity. We have students from different backgrounds. We've got different mental health needs that have grown in our district, as well as, throughout the country. And so the things that we've put in based on our values and at the direction of the board have caused the work that has been done has not just been due to this, this virus. There's a lot of stuff that's increased the workload just because society has been changing over the past, 12 years. And I think some of the changes that have happened and that we've reacted to have been actually in preparation, put us in pretty good stead for this, to react quickly to this kind of situation. Now, obviously, there's a lot of logistical things that we'd like to have another try at, because we kept on making plans and then the timeline kept getting moved up a bit. For example, our in-service on April 13th, we were going to dedicate a good part of that day toward planning for online learning, assuming that we were going to have school called off later this spring. So that moved up a bit. So there's a lot of things I think that we can do that are basically the logistical parts, but the work that's been done in developing the capacity and the skill level of all the staff, I think, has really been what's dominated the work and increased the amount of workload that's happened in this. But that also translates really well into this new environment, because what we keep hearing from the surveys of students and staff and parents is that the connections with teachers are the things that are really missed right now. And so to me, that is a huge indicator that we hadn't anticipated, that shows how well we've been individualizing and personalizing for our learners, because they really care. And I mean, there's a lot of anecdotes that I could share, but I won't, because it's limited time. But just of parents who are saying, "Hey, my kid was Mrs. This teacher." That high school students, who called up and said, "Hey, can you turn off the bells, because I live near the high school, and it's really depressing to hear the bells going off during the day, because I just really want to get back to the high school." Things like that. So I think that everything we've done has led us up to the point where I can say that we have really personalized and made a really good relationship between teachers and students. And so that's a huge mark of success. I wish it didn't have to have been brought up by a massive virus that shut us down. We're very focused on the individual rather than the batch process. Moving into a virtual environment actually makes that even harder, because it's much more of a limited environment and it's harder to personalize. But now people have seen the value in that personalization. So our challenge now is to continue that with all the stuff that the board has done, but then move it into this new online distance learning environment. So I'm excited to go forward and try that. Now that we, have had one shot at it, I think we can do a lot better with a little more lead time. So I'm excited to work on that.
And Tim, your point on the, thanks, John. Leslie?
Well, I
Sorry.
just wanted to say just really briefly that the work on the values, the professional learning on the values, everything that's been done around that, it's evident in our response, the response of all of our educators to this crisis. The concern is about the whole child first and their social emotional needs first. And that's been evident in every conversation. The next thing that's in every conversation is how do we ensure equitable access to what we're doing so that all of our students are continuing to learn and grow and feel supported. And then finally, the conversation has been about the learning and not about the grade. So I feel that this crisis in many ways has been an accelerant to a lot of the work that we've been doing that's really changed how we think about schools and about our students' experiences. And I'm sure that, and not what grade they're earning. That's exactly where we hoped to be minus the virus.
Thanks. Tim, to your point on the school year schedule, I mean, we've had that on our radar for 10 years about does the current calendar year make any sense? And that's when we were talking about balanced school year and that. So I think your question is right on point and something that the visioning committee with administration should probably talk about as we move forward.
Yeah, I think it could give us, I hate to call it I don't mean to call it an excuse, but it is, and I think that if there was ever something we wanted to try, this might be the year to try it.
Great, thanks.
Just one quick example. Our daughters, one of our daughters has a J term, and lots of kids who go to college have a J term. When the kids have so much time off in college, over a month, closer to 5 or 6 weeks, it gives them an opportunity to take some classes that they wouldn't otherwise have had the opportunity to squeeze in. And so they focus on 1 or 2 or 3 classes that they can earn the whole credit, the whole number of credits in a very concise amount of time over a 3-week period, because they're able to go to school for 5 hours a day and focus on that 1 subject or 2 subjects. It could give us some great opportunity in the traditional school year to take on a period of time, because we missed the last 2 months of traditional school this year, to do some catch up and to test that, hey, let's start before September 1st. This year gives us an opportunity to try something we've always wanted to, without necessarily the, pushing back too hard against the rules.
Yep. Thanks. A couple points. One is with the deputy superintendent reallocation to the assistant director of instruction. For me, the name isn't terribly important. I mean, we've got the position funded already. The question is, from the administration standpoint, for me, is what function will that position do? I just think because it's cost neutral, unless the board says we're not going to fund that unless it's a particularized position. I think it's really an administration call in terms of what does that look like? Okay, I thought, that's really intriguing. Like, are we going to need somebody to focus more on distance learning as we move forward to remote learning? And so that's a real opportunity for you folks to focus with a new lens on what that position looks like. And then the question becomes, when do you fill it? Because, the usual paradigm is that you don't fill it until you have functions outlined and then you pick the person who meets the functions. Now, I've been in hiring situations where that's flipped. If you got somebody who's really good and can really adapt, then you develop functions as you go along. So I don't know where that fits into this whole conversation, but I see the need for that position, whatever the functions are, because as you guys are focused as a team, they're gonna be doing curriculum work. I mean, that's essentially what you did, Leslie, as deputy superintendent, in addition to learning your new role. That was critical from a curriculum end, and I can't see moving from that. So that's my thought for what it's worth. Go ahead, Leslie.
Actually, John and I were in complete agreement. We didn't want to think about filling a position until we had a very clear description as to what we wanted that person to do. And that was that's what led us to our research and our interviews with other districts, to be able to better understand their structure so that we could make an org chart that fit our goals as a district. So that's, I think, our thinking, everyone, all of us were very aligned in our thinking. Distance learning is
a position in your staffing plan then in line with your prior thought, and is that still the case?
I don't think that we would change based on the current situation related to distance learning, because distance learning is a change in our format, but it's still putting all the pieces together that we focus on all the time, related to social emotional learning, feedback and learning targets, how to create equitable environments. I mean, the format has changed, but our goals remain the same. They might switch in priority, but they remain the same. So I don't know if we would need someone dedicated to that, because it is simply a shift in what we're always trying to do for our students.
Steve, can I weigh in a second?
Yes.
So I was one of the ones that, when this came up, Brian referenced, kind of got a funny look on her face. That was me. And so I guess, my point was I didn't really understand, but now that I've heard discussions and see it in writing, I think that's a budget neutral position that doesn't really belong in our staffing plan. And as we've gone through COVID, I think we've all seen in all different arenas, including our own, the importance of leadership and learning, and what we've focused on in terms of the Rickabaugh work, and how important self and strategy is outside of structure. And that is a critical position associated with our district, is how we're leading learning and deciding what learning is and what students need. So for me, I believe that can be outside of the staffing plan. It's just my opinion.
Okay. And that's kind of where I settled in, was that is within an operational function of the administrative team to define the roles, given that we've funded the position already. So my other thought is at some point we're going to really have to look at the educator comp plan and post-retirement benefits and start assigning numbers to that. And we were on the way to this, and this hit, and Gina, I just got to tell you guys, I know what's going on in the employment world and what the last 3 weeks have looked like in our lives. And I can tell you that we would be lost without Gina's expertise in navigating this. And she has done an amazing job of taking this district through an incredibly hard HR times with the size of staff that she has. So, at some point we're going to get into talking those numbers when we get time. But Gina, thank you for that. I know all of our administrative team has really done, just worked incredibly hard at this. But I just am familiar with the HR world and know how hard it's been. So thanks.
Well, thank you. You as a board made it very easy by agreeing to pay folks. And folks are working really, really hard in a very different way. So Not every district had that option, and I just feel really grateful that we do and that you approved that. So thank you right back.
Any other comments about or questions about the staffing plan tonight from any board member? One of the things that I heard was that with this crisis, we have seen an opportunity in terms of our vision to seize upon that. And there are aspects of the staffing plan that are geared specifically for that. And I hope you heard that. That's something that rang true with me as well. So, okay. Good. Hearing nothing else, I think we're at the point in time where we can end our journey into our first virtual meeting. I do want you, if you have any questions or comments about how this worked and what we can do better, to shoot them to Brian and me and Leslie, so that we can make sure that we continue to improve through our rest of our meetings while we do this.
Hey, Steve.
Brian and I will confer about the timing, assume that we're still on for next Monday. Anna?
Well,
Yeah.
You have a question, Anna?
No.
Okay.
Barb,
No, it was
Courtney.
that was on. That you're getting to what I was going to ask, which is where did we land for next Monday?
Assume it is on. Unless Brian and I talk in terms of the realistic ability to make decisions on that, given the revenue projections, okay? I want to be a little bit flexible as we move through this and have this conversation with Brian, to get us at a point where next Monday isn't meaningless. We kind of spin our wheels. So do we have anything else on the agenda that we were planning on doing? I know we had some things that we
That was
took
the
off.
only action item.
Yeah, we had some other things that we were contemplating that have fallen by the wayside just because it's not realistic given what has happened the last 3 weeks. Okay. Great. Thanks, everyone. One thing I wanted to end with is that education is being delivered in a lot of different ways in the district with our students and through our teachers. But I think the best form of education has been the example that has been set by the Oregon School District in terms of caring and kindness and modeling that. And so thanks to the administrative team, all of our teachers and staff and our students for exemplifying that as we move through difficult times. So with that, I would entertain a motion.
Motion to adjourn. This is Anna.
Is there a
Second.
second? All those in favor? Well, we got to do a roll call on the adjourn.
Wow.
Ms. Reback,
Yes.
Mr. LeBrun,
Yes.
Ms. Feeney. Barb, you're on mute. You're gonna have to unmute.
You can go, we'll pass.
Ms. Oderico,
Yes, but also I just wanted to add, before you go on, Katie, I just wanted to add a shout out for the Friends of Oregon School District too, Steve and all the handbook board. They did an extraordinary job the last few weeks.
Can you get Troy's picture up? Troy, your mic stopped working, but you can wave and give a thumbs up.
okay.
We can.
Ms. Flanagan
Yes.
and Ms. Feeney,
No.
Mr. Zach.
Yes. We have sufficient number of votes to carry the
Troy
motion
says
to
yes.
adjourn. So Troy said yes. So good. Thanks. We are adjourned at 7:11. Thanks, everyone.
Bye, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.